you'd mentioned earlier, you asked us about crowdfunding. David talked a little bit about, having put together weapons of mass deception. There were a couple of things that we had to sort of overcome initially, and that was, he said, how do two, the real question is, how do two type A personality guys, both of whom are trained to lead from the same institution, put aside their egos long enough to sit down and write something creatively together, where the work is the number one thing, not the credit.
An excerpt from one of today's guests, J.R. Olson, one half of the prolific writing duo of Bruns and Olson. They're both here, and we'll discuss their new military thriller series, Command and Control, right after this break. I'm Robert Child, and this is Point of the Spear. Next time you're on YouTube, check out our Point of the Spear YouTube channel. We've got bonus video material from the podcast, plus tons of military history videos, including full-length documentaries. It's a great way to spend some time, and don't forget to subscribe while you're there, and click the bell icon so you'll be notified of all the great weekly videos we're uploading. Welcome back. Today's guests are both graduates of the Naval Academy and have been creating military thrillers together for more than 6 years. Their new series, Command and Control, launched in January. Their latest book is called Counterstrike, and the duo of David Bruns and J.R. Olson join us now. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having us.
Well, we're honored, and thank you guys for your service. You both spent time in the military. Is that where you met, or how did you come together?
You want to take that one, David?
Yeah, sure. So actually, no. So J.R. and I are both proud graduates of the United States Naval Academy. I was class of 88, the last real class.
Yeah.
JR was 2 years behind me, class of 90. Fun fact, my wife was class of 89, so when we get together, we have a continuum. We did not know each other at the academy. We did not know each other when we served. I got out after 6 years. JR spent a full career in. We actually met when JR retired and came back to Minnesota. And we were both part of the alumni group here. That's actually how we first came to know each other. So we were both in the Navy for, quite a long period of time, but we didn't know each other while we were in.
That's interesting.
And I can continue that on if you want. I can tell a little bit about how we got started writing as a team.
Yeah, definitely. That'd be a follow-up.
We've been asked by the Naval Academy Parents Association here in Minnesota, so their kids were all midshipmen at the Naval Academy, to come and speak about our time at the Naval Academy, about our time in the Navy, and what we've been doing since. And so David and I were there with another member of our alumni chapter, and we went through our backgrounds. David went through his time in submarines, and then when he'd done as a corporate career, a very successful corporate career, I will add. And then I went through my background as an intelligence officer in the Navy, some of the things that I had done. I had kind of a unique specialization in human intelligence, or HUMINT, as a CIA trained case officer working for DOD. And we got done with our respective presentations, got to the end of sort of Q&A with the parents. And one of the parents stood up at the back of the room and said, "You two should get together and write a book." Because David had been talking about the fact that for the last 2 years at that point, he had stopped. He said, "I'm done working for the man. I want to pursue my lifelong career of becoming an author." And he had thrown in 110% on that effort. And he'd already been publishing some work on the science fiction side. So it was sort of a natural thing. And that, this parent said, "We ought to get together and write a book." And so a week later, David gives me a call and says, "Hey, you want to go out to lunch?" And I knew exactly what was coming. So, yeah. And we've been writing together since.
How many years ago was that?
That was in 2014.
Oh, 2014.
Yeah, so I'd finished a science fiction series, and that was the first thing I had written and published. And I was looking for the next thing, and I sort of wanted to do, like a military thriller type thing. But I had been out at that point. I got out in 94. So this was 2014. So I'd been out for actually quite a while. And I wasn't sure I had the military chops, the, relevant experience to actually write it. So when this guy makes this suggestion, I'm like, I could write that, but I would need help. And JR sounds like the perfect guy, because he at that point, I think he had retired like a year or two before.
Going back to that time, 2014, 2015, I noted that in 2015, you crowdfunded a book, Weapons of Mass Deception.
Yep.
What was that process like? Because I know it's not easy. People think it's easy, but it's not.
Yeah. So crowdfunding was actually a really interesting process. So the first hurdle we had to overcome when we started working together was I knew I could write a book because I had just written a couple of books. Could we write a book together? Then could we write a book together that was any good? And then what are we going to do with it once we have it completed, right? So we got it all together, we finished it, and we liked it, and we had, done a lot of work on it, and we decided we were going to crowdfund it. Well, I think we wanted to raise, I think it was $4,000 for editing and for all the book production needs. And you're absolutely right. Just a lot of people think if you just put something up on Kickstarter, people are just going to show up and give you money. That is not how it works at all. We talked to a lot of people about it, and we felt that with the network we had, both with the Alumni Association and professionally, that we could probably raise the money. But I think the important thing that anybody who's thinking about Kickstarting needs to understand is you bring the audience to Kickstarter. Kickstarter doesn't provide the audience.
Absolutely.
So that was kind of lesson number one, which was proven to be very, very true. The second thing we found out that we did not understand and we did not expect was that the thing that really shines on crowdfunding is things that somebody can only get from the crowdfunding event. So for example, we did a hardback dust jacket, limited edition, numbered, signed version of that book. And then we crowdfunded a second book after that. And that was, I think they were $50 a piece. That was by far the best moneymaker for us because it was something that people could only get there. And, people felt like they were supporting a dream, which they were. And they were also going to get something very unique, which they literally couldn't get anywhere else.
They call them perks, right?
Yeah. Rewards, I think, is what Kickstarter used them. Yeah. Other platforms that are similar have similar names.
Getting back to your current book, Counter-Strike, which is your latest thriller and the second one in the series after Command and Control came out in January. Was there a reason why you released these two books so close together?
So that was actually a decision made by the publisher that we signed on with a year ago in December of 2020. They actually decided to release these pretty close together. And frankly, I think that's genius. Counter-Strike's ready to go. Why not get it out the door as soon as possible to follow up on Command and Control? The first three books in this series are actually a trilogy, so they're all directly connected to one another. Think of it like the Lord of the Rings, right? Mm-hmm. So as Command and Control finishes, we set up and Counter-Strike kicks off essentially the next day. And we're actually finishing up the manuscript for the third book in that series, Order of Battle, right now. We might even be done with that by the middle of next week. Is that about right, David?
Maybe? That's a little bit ambitious, but it'll be within the next month.
We'll be close.
Well, how long are your books? Are they average thriller length, 90, 100,000 words or less? Or?
Yeah, so one of the things so when we planned this series, all of our previous books had all been centered on, we call them the WMD files, the Weapons of Mass Destruction files. Each book took a particular threat and it built a story around the threat using a common set of characters. So Weapons of Mass Deception was about nuclear proliferation. Jihadi Apprentice was about homegrown radicalism. Rules of Engagement was about cyber warfare. Pandora Deception was about bioweapons. When we ended that series and we started a new series with our new publisher, which is Severn River Press, we decided we wanted to go bigger. And what that meant to us was we wanted to have a big overarching story over at least the next 3 books, possibly 4 books, and then have individual standalone novels within those. This is essentially a great powers conflict. This is a war and peace for our time, or this is, other books that cover like big, grand World War II type sagas. And the first one is about a Russian deception, and the second one is about Chinese invasion of Taiwan. The interesting part about writing about Taiwan is that it's literally happening right. This is like current events. I think it'd be hard pressed to find a military strategist who doesn't think it's going to happen at some point in the, relatively near future, right?
Right.
So that was sort of the bedrock for that story for us.
I noted that plot line, and it does seem ripped from the, future headlines.
We try.
That's good. That's good. How much do you think that the storyline mirrors a potential future?
Oh, that's a great question. I hope it doesn't. If it does, we're all in deep trouble. I think the great thing about this, you'd mentioned earlier, you asked us about crowdfunding. David talked a little bit about, having put together weapons of mass deception. There were a couple of things that we had to sort of overcome initially, and that was, he said, how do two, the real question is, how do two type A personality guys, both of whom are trained to lead from the same institution, put aside their egos long enough to sit down and write something creatively together, where the work is the number one thing, not the credit. And frankly, we've done, I think, a very good job of pulling that together. We made sure we promised each other that our friendship would trump everything else, that was the number one thing, and that the craft, the art, was what was most important, not our individual egos and whatnot. And the other thing that we tried to do with every one of our stories was to make them as realistic as possible. We both grew up reading these thriller novels, Tom Clancy and others. And whenever, as a career military guy, when I spot something like in a book or in a TV show or a movie that's fundamentally wrong, it just ruins it for me. Right. So we also promised each other that we would do our very best to try and find, be as technically accurate as we could with everything we wrote, within reason, right? Because we're projecting out a little bit about your future capabilities and things like that. But it's all based in what we think is happening, based on the research and development that we see going on right now. So trying to write those stories as technically accurate as possible and projecting out what we see happening, trend lines in the world. I mean, that's kind of what I did as an intelligence officer, right? I mean, that's what we're trained to do in the intelligence community, is to look at trend lines, look at indicators, and try and figure out what's happening. So we try to bring that to our stories.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. March 25th is National Medal of Honor Day, and for that day, we have a very special episode planned. An interview recorded several years ago with one of the Medal of Honor recipients in my book, Immortal Valor, Vernon Baker.
In February or March of 1996, I received a telephone call from a Professor Gibran back at Shaw University in North Carolina. And when this one, I answered, I happened to answer the telephone. I usually don't answer the telephone, but this morning, I don't know what happened. I happened to pick the telephone up and answer it. And a voice on the other end of the line said, "Lieutenant Baker?" "Yes." "So what do you know about the Medal of Honor?" I said, "Nothing," and I started to hang up because I thought it was some nut. And he said, "Don't hang up." He said, "This is Professor Gibran from Shaw University in North Carolina. And the Army has given us a $350,000 grant to investigate why no black serviceman received the Medal of Honor in World War II."
That's next time. March 25th is National Medal of Honor Day, and my new book, Immortal Valor, about the Black Medal of Honor recipients of World War II, is out now. The book chronicles these immortal heroes' life journeys through all the pain and struggle up until their ultimate triumph. I hope you check out Immortal Valor, which is on sale now as we celebrate all Medal of Honor recipients on March 25th. Now back to the conversation. For some of the behind-the-scenes, tactical work, do you have to have your books vetted by an agency in the government?
No. Now, within the first 5 years of my retirement, theoretically, I would have had to do that, but none of the stuff that we're writing is like a tell-all story, like how we took down bin Laden or something like that. Everything we're writing is complete fiction. Right. So we pull everything, all the information right off the internet. I mean, it's literally where we get it. There's lots and lots of material out there in the open source world that talks about RDT&E, research, development, testing, and evaluation. And if you just keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the world, you can kind of see where things are going out there in the world.
Getting back to your friendship and writing as a duo, do you divide up the duties? Does one person take the dialogue? Does another take the action? How do you work it out?
Yeah, so when we start a new book, we sort of brainstorm about what is the story arc, what's the story going to be, right? And we'll have, you know, a number of meetings, anywhere from, you know, 2 to 5 to 10. Pre-COVID, we had breakfast a lot of times, and we'd sort of kick stuff around, and we start out with this core group of characters, and then we have the core problem which we're trying to solve, and then we sort of start to slot stuff together, and we talk about it until we've got, you know, until we can give the high points of the story end to end. So we know where it begins, we know where it ends, we know the big scenes in the beginning, and then we start a process of writing down a narrative, and eventually, over, you know, back and forth and Zoom calls and trading things back and forth, we get to a chapter by chapter. In this chapter, you know, Joe has this, and this is where they are, and this is the time of day it is, and this is what's going to happen in that chapter. And we sort of iterate until we get to that point. And then I go through it and I identify the things that I'm going to need help on. So technical details, right? So if we're writing a scene with a guy who's in the cockpit of an F-35, I'm going to need a lot of information about F-35s because I'm not a pilot, right? So JR does all of our research. So he provides me with anywhere from, you know, the, you know, 2-sentence snippet, and I run from there because I understand what's going on in that chapter, to a 5-page outline of this is what's going to happen, and, you know, this is what happens, this is what button he pushes, whatever. And I write a draft. Our process has iterated over time, but the process as of today is I write a draft. As soon as that draft is done, I put it into Google Drive. It goes to JR. JR looks at it, puts it back into another folder, and I keep going. I typically don't go back and look until we get to the end, and I write chronologically. And then we go back and reconcile, put it into a big document, and then we go through it again. Okay, what's missing? Where do we have plot holes? What needs to be beefed up? What's a couple used for the more complex scenes? A lot of times we'll have iterations on a chapter. We might go through it 3 or 4 times back and forth until we get it right. If there's something very technical, like, for example, the book we're writing now, which is called Order of Battle, comes out in the fall. That's about, speaking current events, that's about Russia invading Ukraine. We do know how to pick them. There's a number of scenes in tanks. We don't know anything about tanks. We reached out to our publisher, reached out to people who follow us, and found some, you know, tankers, and they're helping us out.
Armor officers.
Armor officers, yeah.
Yeah, and who are you know, spent some time on Zoom with us. We watched a ton of videos and read some articles, and we, you know, generated our first tank chapters and sent them in for approval from the boss. We got back a thumbs up, couple things, but, you know, for really technical areas, we typically rely on a technical reader to help us out.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that, if you had like a beta reader or a technical person to go.
Yeah, we have turned to some people that, you know, we either knew, you know, one of us knew that individual, or we got them through our network, and they have been lifesavers really for a lot of the really technical stuff that we're trying to get right without giving away anything classified. Yeah. I'll add on to the process that you know, David and I went through when we wrote Weapons of Mass Deception. We were trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this? And David mentioned it's been an iterative process as we learned our way through this writing process. I can tell you that what we decided to do in the beginning was we outlined about 6 or 8 maybe chapters, what we thought was going to happen in those chapters. We said, well, who's going to do the writing? So we each sat down and kind of wrote the first 3 chapters kind of the way we would do it. And I read mine. You know, I'm a narrative kind of a writer, fact-based writer. As a career intel officer, everything has to be documented and whatnot. Right. David is really a creative writer. I mean, that's really what he had established himself as. And when I read his stuff, I realized that not only does he know how to do dialogue a hell of a lot better than I ever will be able to do, but he can tell the story through that dialogue and through the eyes of the character in a point of view approach that I really, it would take me a long time to master that. He'd already mastered it. And his storytelling was much better than mine. And he'd really kind of turned himself into a writing machine already from the work that he'd done on his own. So it became sort of a natural process where I do the research, you know, prep those chapter outlines ahead of time. give it to him. He does his writing magic, and then I do the edit afterwards or add in the technical details. And it has allowed us, frankly, I mean, the 6-book contract we have with Seven River Publishing is a great example of this. We're able to generate, what is it, a 450 page book every 6 months? It's a good process, you know?
Wow.
But it also helps speed-wise, because if I'm writing along and, you know, a guy bursts into a room and he, you know, whips out his handgun, and I don't know what handgun, so I just put in brackets, fill in handgun here, and I send it to him, right. And he fills in the details, right? You know, so you know, so it's very collaborative from the perspective of, you know, he'll take what I have and he'll, you know, enhance it and build it up and say, well, this part is not working, man. And then we can go back and work through it. So you get sort of an instant feedback, and that to me is something that you don't. For anybody who's ever written a book, you realize you get into these points where you get stuck, and you're like, what the heck am I going to do now? Well, you know what I do? I call JR up and I say, okay, here we are. This is what's happening. This is what we said was going to happen. That doesn't work because this, and this. What do we do? And he's like, well, have you thought about this? Like, yeah, I thought about that. It won't work. Well, have you thought about this? No, I didn't think about that. All right, yeah. And then I'm off again. So he's like an automatic writer's block breaker.
That's great to bounce ideas off each other like that.
I think our new process actually helps us avoid writing ourselves into a box canyon, because we actually set out the outline. I mean, we know what's going to happen in literally every chapter from start to finish at this point in the process that we've built over time. So when we sit down to start writing, we know exactly what's going to happen every single chapter. And it makes it much easier. It's a much more fluid process. You know, proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance, right?
Yes.
So the more, what I figured out from this teamwork that we've had is that the more planning, the more thought you put into organizing your story ahead of time, the more you plot it all out so you know everything that's going to happen, the easier it is to actually sit down and write. That actually becomes almost a simple process.
Right, and it almost eliminates writer's block.
That's right.
For you know, minor things.
Well, it certainly eliminates one of the excuses for writer's block.
Yeah, that's true. Your publisher, I noted your publisher is a military publisher, or launched by a military, former veterans. Talk about your publisher a little bit.
Sure. So Seven River Publishing. So for those that don't know, the Severn River is the one that runs by the Naval Academy, that goes out to the Chesapeake Bay. So Andrew Watts is the principal at Severn River Publishing. I knew Andrew. I met him a few years ago, and he approached me after we got a contract with St. Martin's Press and asked us to write a series for them. And at the time, we weren't really interested, but circumstances changed later. So Andrew is actually quite a successful military thriller writer on his own. He's published a number of books, and he's also marketed them quite well and done quite well. So he knows what he's doing.
Oh yeah.
And he decided a few years ago to bring on another very successful military thriller writer whose name is Jason Casper, I think, West Point graduate.
We don't hold that against him.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's okay. And they formed this company, and so typically what they've done is they take writers who are good writers, who maybe don't have the willingness or the skill to do the marketing side of it, and they take their backlist and they repackage the backlist and market that, and then they add to those series. They're very interested in series because they know that readers of this genre prefer to read in a series. That's also one of the reasons why the strategy of launching the first two books so close together, it just gets you more traction within the Amazon marketing machine.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And I would add to that the characters that we started creating back with Weapons of Mass Deception when that book launched, some of them are continuing on into this new series with Severn River Publishing. We were lucky enough to get approval from St. Martin's Press to go ahead and use those characters in our future novels. So that was very generous on the part of St. Martin's Press. And it was sort of an exciting thing for David and me, because these were characters that we built over years. We know them. They're our friends. So
Sure.
we're able to continue their stories on into this new series of books.
How many books do you have with St. Martin's Press?
So we had 2 on our own. We had 2 with St. Martin's Press, and the contract was Severn Rivers for 6 books. So the second one comes out next week, comes out on the 8th, which is next Tuesday. The first one came out January 11th, so it's been out about 3 weeks. And the third one, it looks like it'll be out sort of mid to late September of this year.
And we do have a number of four novellas as well that we wrote as companion pieces for the first 4 books. Each of those books has their own sort of companion stories, origin story, backstory on a specific character that readers really liked, but we didn't really have a lot of information in there on them. So we decided to give the readers a little bit more of what they were asking for on some of these characters.
That sounds great. Well, congratulations on all the success. The book is called Counterstrike, and it's available at the link in this episode's description. David, J.R., thank you so much for being on the show today. This was great.
Thanks so much
for having us.
That's it for this episode. Thanks again for joining me. March 25th is National Medal of Honor Day, and for that day, we have a very special episode planned. An interview recorded several years ago with one of the Medal of Honor recipients in my book, Immortal Valor, Vernon Baker.
In February or March of 1996, I received a telephone call from a Professor Gibran back at Shaw University in North Carolina. And on this one, I answered. I happened to answer the telephone. I usually don't answer the telephone, but this morning, I don't know what happened. I happened to pick the telephone up and answer it. And a voice on the other end of the line said, "Lieutenant Baker?" "Yes." "So what do you know about the Medal of Honor?" I said, "Nothing." And I started to hang up because I thought it was some nut. And he said, "Don't hang up." He said, "This is Professor Gibran from Shaw University in North Carolina. And the Army has given us a $350,000 grant to investigate why no black serviceman received the Medal of Honor in World War II."
That's next time. And if you like what you hear, leave a review or a rating or just click the follow button. And be sure to check out our Point of the Spear YouTube channel with bonus video material plus full military history documentaries. There's tons to explore, and I hope you check it out. I'm Robert Child, and this has been Point of the Spear.
Music licensed from audioblocks.com. Point of the Spear is produced by RSC Media Group.